My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 62, a retired New York State trooper, and a lifelong hunter. I am writing this as an honest account of what happened in the Faro Lake Wilderness area of the Adirondack Park in the second week of November last year. I had hunted and hiked the woods all across America for 40 years, without embellishment or superstition. I'd taken plenty of deer, small game too, but never a bear. That fateful day, eager and almost giddy, I imagined finally claiming a pelt and skull for my living room. Already, I saw the head above my fireplace, proof I could best the Adirondack wilderness in the one way it had always denied me. I pictured showing it to friends, pointing to the teeth, the girth of the hide. I would finally have succeeded in bringing down one of America's most notorious predators. But little did I know this day would become my worst nightmare. What follows isn't a campfire tale. It is my best attempt to describe my run-in with a large, unknown predator I first thought was a bear, until it turned around and came for me. The location I had chosen was state land west-northwest of Brant Lake. Beaver meadows, mixed hardwoods, spruce bottoms, all cut by narrow drainages. Elevation ranged from 1,500 to just under 2,000 feet. Various old logging roads crisscrossed the area, mostly overgrown, still walkable if you know where to look. A blue-blazed footpath skirted a low ridge, then it dropped into a cedar swamp. It was late in the year. Leaves had already fallen. The canopy was bare and skeletal. The air had a thin, metallic taste, reminding me of old iron. The forest spoke plainly, if a man knew how to listen. Chickadees ticked deep in the brush. Crows bickered over carrion. Water rushed faintly on stone far down a drainage. Underfoot, the soil, softened by freeze-thaw cycles, was spongy in places. My boots sank half an inch with almost every step. In shaded hollows, old snow lingered, icy crusts cracking faintly underfoot. Visibility through the hardwoods was moderate to fair, perhaps 100 yards at midday if the light struck right. Shadows pooled early under the birches. A steady wind blew from the west, 5 to 8 miles per hour, strong enough for hunting but likely to shift suddenly. I told myself I knew this landscape, every bend of ridge, each echo off its valleys. I believed the Adirondacks had shown me all their cards. No secrets remained hidden in these hills. I was wrong, dead wrong. I left my cabin at first light with a Remington 700 fitted with a scope, a day pack slung over my shoulder, and a thermos of hot coffee clutched in one gloved hand. There was a sense of ceremony in the way I locked the cabin door and stepped off the stoop, as if I were setting out on something more significant than just another morning hunt. I intended to still hunt a south-facing slope where bears were known to work the last of the beech mast before snow shut down the ridges. My plan was straightforward. Scout the area with a spyglass from the high ridge, look for fresh signs, and if nothing showed, cut down toward the swamp edge where browse lines and scat often painted a clearer picture. I parked my truck at a pull-off on the old seasonal road and turned off the engine. Silence settled around me like a second skin. This forest was more than a hunting ground to me. It was a place I trusted, a place that shaped me and was always there for me when I faced trouble or had a hard decision to make. I had walked these woods since my early teens, drawn to their quiet logic and the sense of scale they offered. I loved the smell of cold, damp bark and leaf mold, the hush beneath the firs. Sun, first slanting, lit the birches like stained glass. That morning, though, the air buzzed differently. My heart pounded harder than it had in years. Not from exertion, but anticipation. It felt like destiny brushing against the edges of routine. Every crunch of frost under my boots sounded louder and sharper, as if the woods were holding their breath. I pictured myself returning to the cabin at dusk, rifle slung, the reward for my efforts laid out across the tailgate. Anticipation coursed through me like a second heartbeat, faster and hotter than the coffee in my hand. The first sign that morning was a print in a patch of black mud where a seep crossed the trail. It measured a hair over 7 inches across, roughly oval, with toe marks ahead of the pad. At first glance, I thought, bear. My pulse quickened at the sight, a clear sign that I was in the right area, unmistakably large, and had been laid down within the last few hours. The edges were crisp, the bottom slick and dark, glistening slightly in the angled morning light. I crouched and ran my glove along the perimeter, almost reverently. I moved a few feet farther and found 3 more impressions in a staggered line, 2 lefts and a right, heading uphill and into thicker terrain. That's when the first trickle of doubt crept in. The spacing was wider than I'd expect, and the placement was odd. Not the lumbering, pigeon-toed shuffle of a black bear, but something more deliberate, more purposeful. The front track had a shape and depth that didn't quite sit right with me. Longer through the middle, with a pronounced pressure ridge near the front toes. I stood there, staring at the prints, and tried to make sense of them in my mind. A big male, maybe spooked or stalking something. Bears don't always move predictably, especially not in November when food is getting scarce. That had to be it, I told myself. Maybe it had been wounded. Maybe there was another one in the area, and it was nervous. But I wasn't particularly concerned at that point. Nothing else out there should have been big enough to leave a print like that. Nothing native, anyway. I marked the wind, confirmed it was in my face, and eased forward at a deliberate heel-to-toe pace, letting the woods resettle after each step. Each print I stumbled across brought back the excitement, even if unease tugged at the corners of my thoughts. Finally, I told myself, this is it. This is the chance I've been waiting for. I snapped photos with trembling hands, studied the spacing, and kept talking myself through it. If I was going to get this bear, I had to stay sharp. I couldn't let nerves or doubt get in the way now. As the sun rose higher, I picked up more signs. A rotted log was rolled and levered over to expose grubs. A patch of leaf litter was scraped back to reveal bare dirt. A sapling had been bent and stripped of bark. I knelt down at each new hint and studied it. The stripped sapling struck me as odd even then. The wear was high, roughly at my sternum, and the fibers were shredded lengthwise as if pulled rather than raked by casual claws. Still, I grinned. Odd or not, it meant a big animal was moving through this area, and I was on its trail. The thought of finally besting one of the Adirondack giants filled me with determination. Every scrape of bark became proof in my mind. Every overturned log a promise that I was close. Around 10 in the morning, I came across a kill site in a shallow depression. Water is usually gathered there in the spring. A young white-tailed deer, probably a fawn from the previous year, judging by the size of the leg bones, had been brought down. What remained was a rib cage and spine. Most of the meat had already been eaten. However, what really caught my attention was how clean everything looked. The hide had been opened up smoothly along the belly. The big muscle groups had been removed in full, clean strips. That didn't match what I'd expect from a bear. When bears feed, they tend to rip and chew their way through a carcass, leaving ragged edges and crushed bones. This, on the other hand, was more surgical. The ribs had been broken near the sternum and peeled outward in a way that looked almost careful. It reminded me of the way wolves pick apart a kill, something I'd seen out west in Montana and Idaho. But we don't have organized wolf packs in the Adirondacks. Nothing like that, at least. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe it was just a particularly smart bear. Something with experience, something with patience. I told myself that when an animal has been around long enough, it can do things you don't expect. I took out my phone and photographed the scene, marking my location just in case. My pulse had quickened. Something about the way that deer had been taken down flipped a switch in my brain. This wasn't just about hunting a dumb, ordinary bear anymore. It felt like I was following something dangerous, a worthy adversary that made all the effort worthwhile, something that would give me a story I could tell for decades. The thought of finding and beating it became more than a goal. It started to feel like an obsession. By afternoon, the land rose as I climbed a low ridge draped in sugar maple and yellow birch. The ground grew more treacherous, and so did the tracks. They blurred into the leaf litter, and some appeared uncanny. The prints stretched long and narrow, fronted by tufts of pushed-up mud, as if the creature drove off forcefully with its toes. Elsewhere, The tracks landed heel first, then toe, mimicking a human stride. Still, I tried to convince myself that it was just a bear. Bears sometimes step into their own tracks and leave prints that look strange. That's a known thing. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. The patterns weren't like any bear tracks I'd ever seen before, and I had seen a lot over the years. Still, I didn't want to let go of the idea. I wanted this to be a bear badly. After another 10 or 15 minutes of careful tracking, I finally caught sight of the animal I had been following for hours. Just a flash at first, something dark moving through a gap in the birches up ahead, where the ridge curled slightly before descending toward thicker cover. My heart leapt. I stopped dead in my tracks and eased slowly behind a tree, raising the scope to my eye. It was too far off to make out much detail, probably 200 yards out, maybe more, but it was big. Bigger than any deer or coyote. Its body moved in silence, a black mass flowing between trunks in measured strides. I only saw it for a few seconds before it vanished into a crease of land and shadow. But that was enough. The size, the shape, the dark coat, it all screamed bear. My hands were suddenly sweating despite the cold. I brought the rifle up, flicked the safety off, and exhaled slowly through my nose. I crouched low and moved forward in small, silent steps, weaving between the trees like I was walking a tightrope. Every part of me was focused, breathing, footing, posture. I was hunting now. The thrill filled my chest, pushing away whatever strange feelings I'd had about the tracks and the deer carcass I had found earlier. I'd seen the beast. It was real, and it was right there, waiting for me to make my move. I kept my eyes locked on the terrain ahead, heart pounding in my throat, convinced that I was getting close to the moment I had waited for all these years, and I wasn't going to blow it. I moved deeper into the timber, step by step, my heart thudding with the rhythm of the chase. Each time I brought the scope to my eye, I thought I was about to fix on the beast for good. For seconds at a time, I tracked its dark shape sliding through the gaps between trunks. But the more I looked, the more my certainty wavered. The shoulders looked wrong. They were too broad, too high, rising above the rest of the body in a way no bear's did. Once, when the animal slipped sideways between two birches, I could have sworn its back legs bent differently, more forward, as though built for running on its toes rather than flat-footed shuffling. The length of its stride seemed unnaturally long, similar to what I'd seen earlier when I found the first tracks. Through the scope, I thought I saw an actual arm, not a foreleg, swing outward and then pull back in. I lowered the rifle for a moment, shook my head, and convinced myself I was imagining things. Adrenaline plays tricks. Bears look odd when quartering away or crossing uneven ground. That had to be it. Still, my pulse refused to settle. A prickling sensation worked its way up the back of my neck. I crept forward again, slowly, always looking for cover while scanning every opening between the trees with my rifle raised and ready. I had closed the distance to less than 100 yards. Then, after I lowered my rifle for just a second to avoid a root, the strange shape was gone. One heartbeat, I could see the dark mass moving between trees. The next, there was nothing but stillness. The woods had swallowed the creature whole. No snap of a branch, no crack of brush, only silence, thick and heavy, pressing in around me. I froze in place, the rifle low and tight in my grip, my eyes scanning my surroundings. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes, ears straining, eyes scanning every shadow. The forest was too quiet. I had hunted long enough to know when silence was just the calm of nature, and when it was something entirely different, a sign that a large predator was in the area. This was the latter. I eased my breathing, forcing myself not to make noise, and waited. The weight in the air told me I wasn't alone. I shifted my stance and caught a faint movement in the periphery, a ripple of dark fur sliding behind a cluster of pines. My finger tightened against the trigger guard, and I quickly brought the rifle up, trying to draw a bead, but the shape melted away before I could sight the line. A minute later, I caught another flicker, this time behind me and closer. The realization settled cold into my stomach. This thing wasn't running from me. It was circling. The prints I had followed earlier came back to me. The strange spacing, the long stride, the way the impressions suggested a creature built for speed and leverage. Now, with the silence pressing in and the fleeting glimpses dancing around me, I understood my mistake. I had stepped into the territory of a predator that was hunting me as much as I had been hunting it. The rifle felt suddenly small in my hands. I swallowed, turning around frantically while scanning the trees, every nerve screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I spun around at the faint crunch of leaves behind me and almost dropped my rifle. Standing less than 20 feet away was no shadow or trick of the trees, but a dark, furry figure that could have stepped straight out of a horror movie. At first, it was hunched low, shoulders bunched, hands dragging through the leaves like a gorilla. The creature was huge, much bigger than any black bear I had ever seen. It stood probably 5 feet or more at the shoulder on all fours. Its body looked powerful but more slender than a bear's. Its shoulders were wide and strong, with muscles shifting under a patchy coat that revealed large areas of exposed, black skin. Each expansion of the creature's chest seemed to gather the whole forest's air. When it exhaled, it came out in a low rumble that vibrated through my bones. It stood on hind legs, bent forward at the knees, built for speed and power. Distinct toes dug into the ground with curved claws that flexed in and out of the earth, as if kneading like a cat on a pillow. Its front limbs looked more like arms. My eyes followed those arms all the way down to the forest floor, and when I realized they were really hands and not paws, my stomach dropped. The fingers shifted and flexed with unsettling purpose, more like a person testing their grip than an animal idly stretching claws. The thought of those clawed hands raking through my flesh sent a shock of fear through me. I imagined them slicing through skin and bone without effort. The creature's head was shaped roughly like a wolf's, with a long muzzle and teeth that didn't quite fit. The lower jaw seemed too long, too wide. Huge canines were exposed, digging into black lips. Each breath revealed rows of strange fangs, slick with saliva. The ears weren't as pronounced as a wolf's, not considering the size of the head. Still, they stood tall and alert, swiveling slightly to catch the smallest sounds. Its eyes caught the dim light filtering through the trees. They didn't glow, but they reflected, pale and steady, locking onto me with an intensity that made me feel small and helpless. I had looked into the eyes of countless violent criminals during my years on the force, but nothing compared to that stare. It was old, unblinking, and far too aware. By the build of its chest and hips, I recognized the creature as a female. The curve of her ribcage and the heavy set of her pelvis carried an unmistakable shape. The thick fur tapered along her flanks into a narrower waist. Still, the mass of her chest and shoulders seemed almost overdeveloped, soft flesh piled over hard muscle. That imbalance made her look somewhat grotesque, as if nature had done some strange experiment. The longer I stared, the more I realized it was no flaw. Her bulk was functional power, easily capable of throwing me to the ground and tearing me apart if she wanted. The sight chilled me. I suddenly realized I was in grave danger. We stood staring at each other in silence. My hands shook on the rifle, slick with sweat, the metal cold and slippery. She didn't attack. She didn't even growl. Instead, she tilted her head as though studying me, as if deciding whether I was a threat, prey, or simply unworthy of her attention. The forest around us seemed to fall away, leaving only her rough breathing and the pounding of my heart. My pulse hammered in my ears, and the longer I looked at that thing, the more my thoughts fell apart. I kept replaying the tracks, the kill site, the strange glimpses, and now all of it made sense in the worst possible way. Everything about this creature screamed werewolf. Every detail told me she was a predator, smart and dangerous. Her stance wasn't random. She had chosen the angle, the distance, the timing of her reveal. I was cornered, and she knew it. At that moment, my fear overtook me. My throat tightened, my knees wanted to give, and my body screamed at me to act. I didn't even bring the rifle to my shoulder. didn't line up the sights or steady my aim. I just angled the barrel toward the werewolf and yanked the trigger, guided only by panic, not rational thought. The blast ripped through the stillness. The rifle jolted hard in my hands, and smoke filled my nose. The bullet struck the werewolf's flank with a heavy, wet sound, hurling her into a bush. For a frozen moment, I thought it was over. Maybe I had finally dropped the beast, but there was no time to breathe. She rolled and sprang to her feet, eyes blazing with something more like rage than pain. I yanked the bolt back and chambered another round, this time bringing the rifle all the way to my shoulder. I meant to take a proper shot, hoping to finish it off for good. But, in an instant, she was gone. The space where she had just been was empty. Only stirred leaves remained. The strong whiff of rot hung in the air. My eyes darted through the trees, desperate to spot the beast before it could lunge. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. Rustling erupted to my right, then a violent tearing to my left. She was circling, moving at lightning speed, too fast to pin down. I swung the rifle one way, then the other. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. Every noise became a target. I caught a flicker of movement and snapped off a shot. The rifle bucked, the crack echoing, but I hit nothing. Another noise, a panicked shot. I was no longer hunting. I was reacting, flinching at shadows and chasing ghosts through my scope. The werewolf stayed just out of reach, letting me waste round after round. I fired again and again at fleeting glimpses. Each time, convinced I had her in my sights, the shot hit nothing but bark and air. The rifle grew lighter as the magazine emptied. When the last shell was ejected with a hollow clink, reality set in. The Remington 700 only carried 4 in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. I had burned through them all in seconds. My hands went to my jacket pocket, where loose rounds rattled against each other. Feeding them in one by one, bolt back, push down, fight the spring, while that thing circled me was absurd. Under calm conditions, it took half a minute. With sweat and mud slicking my fingers, it might as well have been an eternity. I had nothing left but the sickening sound of my own breathing and the rustle of the monster stalking me. That was when I lost it. Panic took me whole. I turned on my heel, the empty rifle clutched in trembling hands, and ran, crashing through brush, fleeing a creature straight out of a horror movie. Branches whipped against my face as I barreled through the underbrush, lungs straining, every breath burning like fire. I ran blindly, crashing through briars and low limbs, no longer caring how much noise I made. Behind me, I could hear the beast following me. She was no longer circling at a distance. Her massive body pounded the forest floor in great loping strides, closing in quickly. My boots slipped on damp leaves. I stumbled down a small slope. Pain shot up my leg as my ankle twisted sideways. I pitched forward, slamming face first into the dirt. The rifle flew from my hands, clattering against a tree trunk. For a moment, the world went black at the edges of my vision. I coughed, choking on soil and dead leaves, and clawed desperately for my empty weapon. The footsteps behind me slowed. I could hear the weight of the monster bouncing off the ground as it closed the distance, the rustle of leaves disturbed by its huge form. My hands found the rifle, and I dragged it to my chest, fumbling with shaking fingers to get at least one round into the chamber and make my stand. But it was pointless. My hands were clumsy, slick with sweat and mud, and I could hear the werewolf approach just a few yards behind me. I cursed under my breath, heart hammering as I realized that this was it for me. I was out of options, might as well face it. I slowly turned around, still on the ground, clutching the useless rifle. The beast was there, not 10 feet away. Then, with a fluid, deliberate motion, the creature straightened. Vertebrae cracked as it unfolded higher and higher, until it stood upright, over 8 feet tall. The sight of this thing standing like a person sent a cold rush through my veins. Her broad chest heaved, her teeth were bared. Her eyes locked onto mine with an expression that felt disturbingly deliberate, as though she was savoring the moment. Her breath came in short, rumbling huffs, not from exhaustion, from anticipation. She was enjoying her victory, or my terror. Then it came, the sound that shook me more than her size or her stare. She lifted her head back and released a howl, but it wasn't the clean, mournful note of a wolf. It was broken, twisted, more like a wail than a call. It carried a human edge, stretched and distorted, a cry of pain, hunger, and rage that stirred the marrow in my bones. The forest shuddered with it, birds bursting from branches high and low, and my eardrums buzzed with the sheer force of the noise. I lay pinned under that sound, rifle shaking in my grip, utterly helpless. I realized how absurd this whole thing was. I had come out here to hunt a bear, and now I was about to get mauled by a damn werewolf. But before I could even finish my thought, another sound ripped through the valley. A second howl, distant, but equally powerful, and just as weird. It was different in pitch, deeper, and closer to a moan, but it rolled through the trees like thunder. Whether it was a mate or a rival, I couldn't tell, but the moment it erupted, everything changed. The werewolf's head snapped toward the noise immediately, small ears perked up, her whole body tightening like a bowstring. The anticipation in her stare vanished, replaced by a new urgency. She sniffed the air sharply, claws flexing in the dirt beside my head. I could see the calculation in her eyes, as if she had already decided that I was no longer important. Whatever had called from the distance demanded her full attention. Without another glance, the monster in front of me turned and bounded away, vanishing into the trees with terrifying speed. Branches bent and cracked under her weight, the rhythm of her strides fading as she covered ground with impossible speed. Within seconds, she was gone, swallowed by the forest, leaving me behind. I lay flat in the dirt, gasping, pants wet, rifle clutched in my trembling arms. My ankle throbbed, my chest heaved, and the reality of having survived seeped in. She had spared me, not out of mercy, but because something else was out there. Maybe another one of these things. I didn't waste time trying to figure out what those things were or where they had come from. I forced myself up, biting back the pain in my ankle, and wiped dirt from my face. My legs shook, but I knew I couldn't stay down in these woods. Gritting my teeth, I grabbed the rifle, reloaded it, and started limping as fast as I could toward the road. Every step felt heavy, but I pushed through, telling myself I had to reach the truck. The woods seemed endless, shadows pressing in, but the thought of that old pickup kept me moving. I staggered, stumbled, caught myself, and kept going until the outlines of the trees began to shift, and I knew I was getting closer to safety. I reached the truck just as the sun began to slide down the sky, casting the forest in a dull bronze glow. My hand fumbled with the key before I finally unlocked the door and collapsed into the driver's seat, slamming it shut. For a long minute, I just sat there, shaking. My breath came in ragged bursts. My ankle throbbed, and every part of me felt scraped raw, physically and mentally. I set the rifle across my lap and stared through the windshield. The forest looked exactly as it always had. Still, quiet, trees casting long shadows, wind stirring the leaves, nothing out of place. And yet everything had changed. My brain began replaying every moment with mechanical precision. The strange prints in the mud, the deer carcass, gutted with surgical care, and finally, the creature itself, huge, intelligent, and completely real. I had seen a werewolf, not in a dream, not in a movie, in the flesh. It was no myth, no metaphor, no superstition to scare kids around a campfire. It was real and out there in the woods. Woods I had hiked and hunted for decades without a care in the world, always certain that I was the top dog, the apex predator. My training told me to think critically, to assume misidentification, to suspect disease, a mutation, maybe even illegal bioengineering. Then there was the second howl, the one that pulled the female away like a command or a challenge. Was it another one like her? A mate? A rival? A pack leader? I didn't know. But the implications of that second howl changed everything. It wasn't just that there was one of these things in the Adirondacks. It was the possibility, no, the certainty, that there were more. That thought was worse than the encounter itself. If one creature could remain hidden out here for who knows how long, what about 2, 3, 1,000? The state park alone spans millions of acres. There are miles of dense wood, deep ravines, and hidden clearings no human has ever set foot in. I couldn't help but think of what else might be hiding out there. I started the truck and turned onto the dirt road, driving slowly, eyes scanning the tree line for movement. The sun was almost gone, and I knew I was done with hunting. I don't think I'll ever set foot in the woods again. Not here, not anywhere, not with what I'd seen, not with what might be watching from the dark.